The entire debate over electronic voting machines has raged on in India on multiple occasions. However, this time this debate is not coming in India, it's coming all the way from the United States of America. Because the national security head there, the director of the national security, Tulsi Gabbard, who was here in the national capital just a week or two back, being felicitated through grand functions here, has now gone back to the US. And once again, Ms. Gabbard has taken this position that there is a problem with electronic voting machines, not in India, but certainly in America. What should we in India be making out of this? With me, the well known former Chief Election Commissioner, Mr. T.S. Krishnamurthy, joining us. Great pleasure for us to be welcoming you here on the Squirrels today.
Very good evening, Mr. Chubey. I'm delighted to see you again. Well, EVM is always in the news, and it will continue to be in the news forever, I suppose.
I guess so, sir. But let me straight away begin by asking you, sir.
Yeah.
While Ms. Gabbard has not taken the name of India in her comment, but does her comment not add to the air of suspicion which has existed in India about the usage of electronic voting machines?
Well, I suppose, as far as India is concerned, the entire electronic voting machine system is unique. It is not comparable either to the Japanese technology or to the Western electronic machines. First of all, I suppose you remember in those days when it was first introduced in US, it was manufactured by a private sector company which had made huge donations to a particular party in the US. In fact, that was one of the reasons why most of the people rejected the electronic machines in US, at least as an argument for introduction throughout the country. But what is more important is the Indian machines have been uniquely manufactured. It is not connected to internet. It cannot be connected with a remote control. It is a self-sustaining machine. It operates on its own standalone machine. And we have given so many opportunities to political parties to come and prove to us, to the court, that the machines are not credible. I have no hesitation because in my time, it was in 2004, when we introduced it on an all-India basis, even though the machines were tried in some of the smaller elections or some of the states' elections. But as a national experiment, we introduced it in 2004. And what is very significant is no election petition on the efficacy of the electronic voting machine was ever there except one or two, which were actually later on proved to be wrong. So, and then we have given from time to time opportunities to the political parties, both the election commission as well as the judiciary, for them to come and prove. And I suppose you also know, you were there in the electoral scene in those days.
Yes, sir.
Two party leaders, went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court gave them ample opportunity to prove whether the electronic machines could be tampered with. And both of them got elected in the next election. Thereafter, they didn't speak against the electronic voting machine. That is one. The second point I want to stress is the system that is followed in Western countries is totally different. It has a mixed system. It is not as a standalone machine as we have in India. That's very important. And our machines, as I told you, is manufactured in public sector, defense public sector units, that is Bharat Electronics and Electronics Corporation of India. And the chip is burnt. It cannot be reused. So there is no question of the reprogramming on the chip. What is programmed will stand alone and it cannot be interfered with. With all this, of course, there were doubts raised by many political parties, and then the Supreme Court agreed for voter verification paper.
But what do we mean? So, I think there are two separate questions. Just the last bit that you're alluding to.
Yeah.
See, there is the process of casting your vote, which is the usage of the electronic voting machine. And then there is the entire process where the administration gets to decide whether you have the right credentials to cast your vote or not. So these are two completely separate scenarios. In India, would you agree with me if I was to say that maybe electronic voting machines are completely tamper-proof, but the process, the entire mechanism, the revision of electoral rolls, the issuance of an election ID card, most recently we have seen how that unique number which is associated with each unique voter was actually being copied in different states. And it took media reportage for the present chief election commissioner then to take some proactive steps. So would we say that actually foreign interference or some tampering, not necessarily of electronic voting machines, but of the process of casting your vote?
Okay. The point is, as you rightly said, there are two aspects to the use of the electronic voting machine. One is the actual casting of the vote through the machines, and the incidental activities relating to the exercise of the ballot, particularly the voter register, the voter identification, etc., etc. I agree with you. There are certainly problems which have been brought to surface now on the infrastructure relating to voting. But the first point is whether the electronic voting machine is credible or not. I mean, having been associated with it for quite some time, I can, without any hesitation, say that there is no need to doubt the credibility of the machine. If political parties are still having some reservation, they are most welcome to give suggestions to improve the credibility. But the answer to the fault finding of the electronic voting machine is not paper ballot. Unfortunately, the US National Security Advisor, she has been told that people should go back to the paper voting. I do not agree with that, particularly in a country like India, where the voting population has crossed more than 800 million. And if you are going to use this kind of a system, not only it is defective because frauds have been committed in the paper ballot, but also the fact that in terms of time consumption, in terms of paper consumption, in terms of yearly declaration of results, etc., the machine has certainly an important advantage over the earlier system. That is one. Secondly, you mentioned about the defects in the voting system itself. In fact, I have, as I probably mentioned to you earlier, I have written a book. Just it is going to be released in a month's time under the title called Beyond the Ballot Paradoxes of Democracy. I have pointed out that how there are international, I won't say conspiracies, but international forces operating in the working of elections and the working of democracies, where they would like to certainly bring some kind of indirect, subtle influences in the electoral verdict. So there are certainly many people who question. Probably these questions have to be answered by the Election Commission. I entirely agree.
But is it the Election Commission? Because the limited reportage that I've seen in the context of this book, which is going to be published, it seems that you're saying that interference can be through the process of manipulation of information. But here the specific question is on the electoral process itself. So my specific question to you is, if I take your point that the EVM is completely beyond any targeting or beyond any impact whatsoever, would you be as confident to say that the process, the rest of the electoral process is also as robust as you seem to be suggesting is the EVM?
I would like to invite your attention to some of the researches that have been conducted. There are deliberate attempts by certain countries to even influence the electoral processes, the voting, influence the voters, influence the political parties, and so on. But as far as the Indian scenario is concerned, I'm not saying it is absolutely foolproof. There is a possibility of always interference with the system. But the system that we have has not given any indication of it being hacked or hampered by any external influences, both in terms of the machine itself as well as in terms of voter register or electronic identification. Now, you mentioned about the duplication numbers of the electronic identification ID cards. The Election Commission has clarified, I suppose you are aware, that these have been delegated to the states as far as these numbers are concerned. And this mistake should not have occurred. Obviously, they are taking corrective action to ensure that the duplication of numbers doesn't take place. But they have very categorically informed that it has not influenced the quality of voting, or it has not influenced any bogus votes to be cast. This is a point that they have clarified. Of course, I have no further information to that. Well, every doubt has to be answered by the Election Commission, probably through an impartial agency if necessary.
So in your book, sir, I understand there is a specific chapter about foreign interference.
Yes.
Please help us understand, what is foreign interference? If the EVM machine you're saying is absolutely correct, the electoral process you're saying is also absolutely correct, then how is foreign interference taking place in the electoral system?
No, I'm not saying that even when correct credible situation systems are there are no influences. There are influences, both. In fact, I have quoted a number of research studies where two major countries, the Russian and the US governments, are supposed to have influenced the electoral outcome. So it is not that everything is so hunky-dory and that nothing is not influenceable. There are various methods by which these influences take place. Even if the system is credible, there is always an attempt to prove to the world that this system is not credible. I'm not questioning the right to question it. Certainly, they have every right to question the credibility of a machine. And it is the duty of the Election Commission to prove to the satisfaction of the voters that the system is robust and credible. I'm sure they will be taking necessary action in this regard. But what I wish to say is please do not compare the Western nations' system of elections to that of Indian system, both in terms of the electronic voting machines as well as the process of voting. Now, I have seen the 2004 elections in US personally, I've seen, and how different methods are followed by different states in the conduct of the election. There is no uniformity at all. Whereas in India, we have a centralized election commission, a centralized election system. There is very little scope for any kind of interference. But there are clear indications of studies actually of both the governmental agencies and non-governmental agencies trying to influence some kind of a decision in the electoral process as well as in the electoral verdict.
No, sir. Sir, please clarify. Sir, please clarify on this. See, I'm again asking you, sir. Interference can be either through the electoral process itself, or interference can be one is trying to spread some propaganda, there is fake news, there's disinformation campaign. All that is part of the course. I'm not on the other 3 points. I'm only and only on the point of the electronic voting machine, the voter ID card, and the process for an individual to go and cast his or her vote. In your understanding, that is absolutely above suspicion in our country.
As far as my knowledge is concerned, it's absolutely robust. There is no need to doubt at all. Okay. But as I said, there are always questions raised deliberately to tar the image of the electoral process and electoral system in India. And these things are very common, not only in India. We have studies to indicate that it is happening in all over the world. Many the democracies are not at all independent democracies today. And the intention seems to be to make them as dependent democracies. That is the reason why I say, well, when every question is raised about the credibility, we have to answer, if preferably through an independent agency if it is necessary. But we cannot automatically question the credibility of the mission just because it has not worked well in any of the Western democracies. That is one. Secondly, I think the National Security Advisor of US has only said she has received complaints. I have not seen any news item to the effect that they have been found to be correct. Okay. That I suppose they will go through the investigation process and come to a conclusion. Right. So these are things that have to be borne in mind. And as far as my views are concerned, the system is reasonably perfect in this country. It has evolved over a period of time. There are certainly scope for improvement. For example, the manual handling of the machines. There are sometimes questions raised. For example, you saw in the West Bengal election, sometimes people carried on the scooter the electronic voting machine, which was certainly not in accordance with the instruction. So there are human errors coming into the system. There is no doubt about that. These have to be watched for. These have to be taken care of. But per se, the electronic voting machine in India cannot be doubted just because the Western countries have questioned it. That is one. For example, Brazil has been using this machine for a long time. There is no controversy there in that country. How is it that only in some of these states the questions are being raised? I have not seen any person questioning the voting electronic machines in Brazil. Okay. In fact, they use a touch screen system also, whereas we don't use the touch screen. So my simple statement is, yes, if there are questions, they have to be examined, they have to be answered, they have to be people have to be satisfied. But as of now, I don't think you can really get scared by the statements made by the National Security Advisor in the US.
All right, Mr. Krishnamurthy, thank you so much for clarifying all those doubts for our viewers. Thank you so much. It's a great speaking
Thank
to you.
you. Thank you.